This is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety's Disaster Discussions podcast, where we explore the intersection of weather and the built environment.
In part 2, we continue our discussion to include the Palisades Fire, and we dive into observations and conclusions from this deployment. All right, well, I want to move on to the Palisades Fire next. The Palisades Fire started Tuesday, January 7th around 10:30 a.m. local time, southeast of Palisades Drive near the Pacific Palisades and Topanga Canyon area of LA County. And the fire started behind homes on Piedra Morada Drive in the Summit neighborhood. It then made its initial spread southeast through a small canyon, becoming a discrete conflagration. While the official cause of the fire remains under investigation, residents of Piedra Morada Drive reported the first signs of the fire beyond their backyards near Skull Rock. Within about an hour, the fire spread south of the initial ignition to 2 homes on Lockman Lane near the Fire Road and Pacific Palisades before spot fire spread to Palisades Drive, Coastline Drive, and neighborhoods surrounding the Getty Villa. By the evening hours, the fire had transitioned into a built environment conflagration as it continued spreading into Palisades Village, into Malibu, and all the way down to the Pacific Ocean. So we spent Sunday through Thursday surveying the Eaton Fire. Then Friday through Sunday, we moved to surveying the Palisades Fire. The incident command post for this one was near Zuma Beach. And we once again partnered with the DINS teams. Our meeting point with them was at Point Dume, or Dume, not quite sure how to say that one. Typically for fires in this area, the ICP is stationed at Will Rogers Beach. And when this fire started initially, that was the case. But Steve, we heard from a few of our CAL FIRE partners. They were actually telling us that the ICP had to move in the middle of the fire for maybe the first time ever. How unusual is this?
Yeah, I recall, watching some live footage of the first day of the incident where they announced where the ICP was located there at Will Rogers Beach, and then at some point in the incident where it was having to be relocated because the fire had actually reached that location. And as you mentioned, we were able to talk with some folks during our deployment that said that this is the first time ever that the fire had reached that location. And from an incident command perspective, it's a really good location in terms of it's got a good size to that parking area for to accommodate a lot of people and resources, easy access in and out, and in close proximity to the fire. But in this instance, this fire was different. The fire actually did reach that location, and which made their decision to move the incident command post the right decision. You really can't effectively manage an incident when you have to contend with heat, smoke, and embers, and you never want an ICP or an incident base to be within the fire's perimeter. So it was a good decision on their part to move it outside of that location. And so then the Great Pacific Fire Break had a role here, where the fire started just outside the community under the strong Santa Ana winds and quickly blew down to the Pacific Ocean, in which case the front of the fire, or more commonly referred to as the head of the fire, burned itself out. And the remaining fire most active area was on the flanks of the fire, which could spread laterally up the coastline and down the coastline. And that continues to burn in that fashion until the wind changes or dies down or dies out completely, in which case then fire will want to go back to what it normally does, is burn fast uphill in steep drainages and canyons and hillsides. And as the normal onshore wind flow resumes, then that can aid in the spread of the fire in the opposite direction of the initial fire spread.
Yeah, and this was unusual because, you hear about the marine layer. So for these areas immediately on the coast, the relative humidity is usually higher there. Usually the fire does not burn all the way down to the ocean. Kind of talk about that aspect. Is that surprising to you? I mean, have we ever seen a fire burn all the way down to the Pacific Ocean like this that you know of, Steve?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It has happened a number of times, usually in Southern California, associated with the Santa Ana wind event, where those very strong winds can really overtake the natural fire behavior of wanting to burn uphill and push it downhill directly to the ocean.
Well, it's certainly something to see those homes that are literally perched, on the ocean, just completely burned to the ground. It's certainly a devastating sight to see. So with the survey, we started mostly with the homes that backed up to what we call the WUI, or the wildland urban interface. So some of these are up at a higher elevation. Really, these homes are nestled right up next to the mountains. The wildland, really, they're literal backyards, and with a lot of these homes that we started with. And here the damage is a little bit more sporadic. Homes were larger. They had some better structure spacing. And then we saw more widespread damage to clusters of homes as we worked down in elevation. Again, the structure spacing was a little tighter on some of those homes. We were not able to fly our drone for this fire perimeter due to ongoing search and rescue efforts, but CAL FIRE drone teams were able to help us out with some of that footage a few days later. So just want to contrast our operations, kind of tell us some of the differences between Eaton and Palisades as far as our deployment strategy.
Yeah. So I think really from a deployment strategy, I think our goals and objectives were really the same in both fires, right? Our objectives, but obviously the conditions on the ground dictate just different strategies too. So I think one of them was just a logistical thing. So in order to, as Steve said, they moved the incident command post for this fire, and just from an accommodations perspective, we had between an hour and 2 hours drive in and out every day in order to actually access the area. The other dynamics that are different is just is that kind of in the post-fire aspect, it's longer since the fire started, right? So there's a lot more people, a lot more utilities being restored in that front, just because this is perfectly normal. The longer you get from the incident, the more recovery efforts are underway. So just due to that timing, there were a lot more recovery efforts, whether it be power, whether it be water, what have you. And I think the other dynamics that was different in the Palisades is that there was a lot of less, I would say, homeowner reentry when we were there compared to the Eaton fire, where I think Rachel, you and I were there the day after we had surveyed a home, and a homeowner came up and he was starting to repair his house already just one day after we'd actually surveyed it.
Yeah, we did start to see some folks come back. We also came across several homeowners who had stayed behind as well. We heard some stories of them defending their properties successfully in some cases, and so some folks did choose to stay behind during these fires. So sort of a mixed bag as far as who we encountered. But a lot of it was still fairly closed off. So I want to back up to the beginning of the Palisades incident. I want to talk a little bit more about how this fire transitioned into a conflagration. Obviously, a lot of media coverage with this, a lot of factors that went into how this became a conflagration. So I want to go over a few of these factors, and some of these were mentioned in our early insights report that we have on IBHS.org. So first off, there was a limited window of time to prevent conflagration. We had gusts over 80 miles per hour, though, at the time of the ignition, and these winds maximized short-range ember transport and resulted in extreme ember attack for the built environment almost immediately. The structural embers were very large. I said some were as large as limes. There were a lot of fruit trees in California. A lot of the fruit had fallen on the ground, I guess from the windstorm or the fire. And I walked into a yard and there was an ember, and it was literally as large as the lime that was laying in the grass. So these were really big structural embers. These were transported by the wind. So talk about, what does short-range ember transport mean, and the extreme ember attack for the built environment. Kind of describe what that looks like.
Yeah, so really these embers can range in size from something really, really small like you'd have in your campfire that kind of self-extinguish as you watch them float up, to embers that can travel multiple miles in front of the flame front. And I think so these are the different aspects, and obviously the size of the ember really matters, right? And so the larger the ember, the more kind of fuel it has to keep burning, right? So when it comes into contact with your home or vegetation, it's a much larger risk, that larger size, to be able to ignite the material around it.
So that limited window of time, that would be pretty soon after the fire actually ignites.
Yeah, that's right. So it's after that fire ignites, you can start producing really embers almost immediately, which then cause that continued cascade of embers, as Steve mentioned before, just these continuing moving forward, or spot fires that continue the perpetuation of these fires.
And of course, one way to combat that would be with aerial attack, but this was not possible due to high winds. So there were no air resources from Tuesday evening all the way through Wednesday morning. So this left the hydrant system as the primary method of firefighting. And the hydrant system is not meant to fight conflagrations. Talk about why that is, Steve.
Yes, and we've seen loss of water on a number of incidents, conflagration type fires, the Camp Fire, Tubbs Fire, Lahaina fires are examples of that. And I recall early on in the fires watching live news coverage and seeing press conferences where the LA County Fire Chief and Pasadena City Fire Chief addressed this exact situation. So municipal water supply systems are designed to handle a few fires, a few structures burning at one time, not hundreds of structures burning at the same time, and with dozens of fire engines connected to the fire hydrants flowing large volumes of water. And so every structure that ignites and burns, the water piping within that structure can also become compromised, leading to a leak of water. And that just really compounds the issue of less water pressure available for the firefighters and less amount of water for the firefighters to utilize. And I want to point out, I think it's really important here, of the interview that the Pasadena fire chief gave, and he went on to say in his interview, and I'm paraphrasing here, that even more water would not have enabled the firefighters to stop the fire because of the extreme wind and embers traveling very long distances out in front, igniting new fires. So I think he's spot on that comment. No amount of water really here would have changed the ability of the firefighters to stop the conflagration that was ensuing. And we even mentioned this in our Return of the Conflagrations in our Built Environment paper that we released in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about just your average everyday house fire, I mean, you know, I know it depends on the number of alarms and things like that, but you're going to have at least one fire truck with a whole crew at your house just to fight your everyday basic fire. Think about the water that goes into it, the manpower that goes into it. And we're talking about thousands of structures, you know, simultaneously being consumed. And the hydrant system is just not made for that. This was, as we say, uncontrollable structure to structure fire spread. Another aspect were as you've already alluded to, the extreme fire conditions overwhelming those firefighting efforts. So the wind direction paralleled the rows of homes. So this pushed the fire deeper into the communities. During the first 24 hours of the Palisades fire, there were also 3 other wildfires that ignited in the county. We had the Eaton, of course. We also had Hearst and Woodley fires. So 4 fires ongoing at once with these extreme conditions. LA County Fire Chief acknowledged that there was not enough manpower for an emergency of this scale. Just absolutely massive scale. We talked to several homeowners, again, who remained behind with a plan to defend their homes. Some of them were able to do that with, some of them installed some pipes to enable the use of larger diameter fire hoses on their properties. We talked to one homeowner who even had a fire engine drop a hose into his pool to take advantage of that water supply. But Steve, talk about the different agencies that responded to the Palisades fire and just talk about the extreme nature of this fire. I mean, there's no situation where crews could not have been overwhelmed.
Right. And California has a very robust mutual aid system to it. And so when you have an incident like this, the closest available resources respond to the incident. And then as additional resources are needed, they're called from further and further and further away. And that's where that very robust mutual aid system that's managed through the Governor's Office of Emergency Services comes into play, as they're able to quickly mobilize additional resources in a strike team configuration for engines. That's 5 engines with a leader, and get them on the road and deploy them to the incident as quickly as possible. And this was a known event with a red flag warning that was coming. So some resources were pre-positioned down to that area in anticipation that wildfires could develop out of the drought and windy conditions. And So they really were as prepared as you can possibly be for this type of scenario to unfold. But unfortunately, with the extreme winds that ensued, it's really just, as we mentioned, the firefighters didn't have much of a chance to stop the fire once it got really seeded and its intensity increased to the point where they couldn't put the fire out. And with the loss of their aerial resources, they were kind of fighting the fire with one hand tied behind their back.
Well, they certainly tried. We saw plenty of evidence of firefighter suppression as we surveyed a lot of these homes. And we know that without their efforts, these fires could have actually been even worse. Talk about that, Murray.
Yeah, one of the contrast things from what we looked at in Lahaina, where a lot of the structures that survived did not have firefighter intervention, right? So they survived. In this case, a lot of the houses we surveyed showed some evidence of firefighter intervention, whether it be as simple as knocking down a gate. It doesn't always have to be water. Sometimes it's just breaking that pathway. We saw evidence of that. We saw evidence of just them suppressing bushes that had been on fire, all the way up to where they, as Steve mentioned earlier, just cutting holes in the roof and ventilating the roof in terms of suppression activities. So we saw a lot of those activities. And one of the things, as we talked about the streakiness of the fires earlier, is once you stop that chain, once you have that house that, say, the firefighters were able to extinguish it, it no longer is a threat to downstream structures or downwind structures. And therefore, you could create these pockets of unburned structures due to that one action that the firefighters took. So in a lot of cases where you saw one structure that was affected and had clear suppression activities, it could have saved multiple downstream structures as well that might have otherwise been lost.
And how does this compare to Lahaina? I know there was maybe a little less intervention with that fire.
Yeah, in most cases for the structures that survived in Lahaina, there wasn't suppression activities that was the cause of them not igniting. It was other factors to do with their constructions or connected fuels.
Yeah, didn't you have a statistic though? Was it 97%?
Yeah, almost 97% of homes in Lahaina did not have ignition.
Okay.
Or sorry, did not have intervention.
Okay. And of course, in addition to property preservation, they were, busy with preservation of life as well as these fires were ongoing as they performed search and rescues. Another aspect we've already hit on a little bit, that water supply, though. The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power chief executive told reporters in a press conference that the water system was pushed to the extreme after 4 times the normal demand for 15 consecutive hours. There just simply wouldn't have been enough water, as you mentioned, Steve. Talk about that.
Yeah, certainly the priority at an incident is life safety first, and then property preservation and natural resources to follow. So as long as you have people in harm's way, that's the firefighters' focus, is to preserve their lives and get them out of the impacted area. And while their attention is diverted kind of to, and rightfully so, to the life safety issue, they're not defending structures and they're not suppressing the fire, and the fire is able to really take hold within the community and continue the spread through the community.
Another unique aspect of the Palisades fire, we saw this play out, a lot of media attention surrounding the evacuation traffic, as well as the abandoned vehicles blocking roads. One thoroughfare in particular where folks were having trouble getting out in their vehicles, so they stopped and got out of their vehicles. They were left parked in the road, and at one point, a firefighting bulldozer had to push the cars out of the way. So that's just yet another unique factor to this fire that made things even more challenging. So all of these above factors allow the Palisades fire to become the 3rd most destructive in California history, the Eaton fire being the 2nd most destructive in California history. Now, so can you guys compare and contrast Palisades and Eaton to the Camp Fire? I know Camp Fire still stands as the most destructive, but these two certainly not too far behind. If you want to take that one, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Camp Fire destroyed 18,804 structures. Palisades and I'm not sure if this number's finalized or not, but 6,837 structures destroyed. So it really just speaks as historically destructive as the Palisades fire was. It's 3 times less destructive almost as the campfire. So the campfire just, really virtually destroyed the town of Paradise and other communities in the path of the fire. So I think that's one of the distinctions. The difference in terrain, Paradise, sits on a high up plateau up off the valley floor with very steep drainages on either side of it. And then the Palisades fire had pockets of communities kind of built onto hillsides with steep drainages as well. But the entire town of Paradise was situated on this plateau. So that's a difference with the terrain. Strong winds and drought and vulnerable community. Those are other factors that were actually very similar to between the campfire and the Palisades fire. And I think size of structures, structure separation, distances in Paradise were greater than they were down and generally overall than they were in the Palisades fire.
So we have Camp, Eaton, Palisades, Tubbs. Steve, you've seen all 4 of these fires, is that right? The aftermath of these?
Yes, 2 of them with CAL FIRE and doing damage inspection, the other 2 with IBHS.
So is there anything that stands out to you personally, whether it's Eaton or Palisades in comparison to the other fires that is unique or different, or just anything that you noticed?
I think the age of the communities, they were built longer ago than Paradise and the Santa Rosa community were for the Tubbs fire. So I think the age of the community and structure separation distances, that's all what really plays into how easy it is for a fire to spread through a community. Those are some of the differences, but there's also a lot of similarities with structure spacing, connectivity of fuels, and the building materials that are very vulnerable to a wildfire.
Yeah, so I want to talk about some of those observations, some of those conclusions that we have started to pinpoint from our surveys there. So we surveyed about 200 homes. How is this for a sample size, Murray?
Yeah, so for an IBHS inspection to the detail that we looked, it's actually quite a large sample size. To put in perspective, we have probably at the end we probably actually surveyed closer to 250 homes, which is about 100 more than we were able to survey in Lahaina when we were there. So we have a fairly large and robust sample size to actually go and look at these results.
And some observations, we did notice that it was garbage day for many of the homes in these neighborhoods. A lot of the cans were full. Some of them were out at the street. And we estimate that the fuel load of a full garbage can is equivalent to about 3 gallons of gas. So again, some were out on the street. We saw them just completely incinerated. Some of these literally turn into, a puddle of what was once a plastic garbage or recycle bin left over on the street. Maybe just some remnants left over, just a pile of glass bottles in some case was all that was left from some of these garbage cans. Then in other neighborhoods, maybe it was not trash day in those because we saw a lot of garbage cans also very close to homes as well, which eventually served as connective fuels. At one house, we even saw some embers that were melted into the lid of the garbage can. And then at another house, we saw a garbage can. It was placed right next to the garage door. It was obvious the garbage can had caught fire and caused the garage to catch on fire as well. So talk about the role of garbage cans as connective fuels.
Yeah, they definitely are connective fuels. I'll say that. I think as we were talking about internally with people, I made the very, very kind of blunt statement. Garbage cans are taking out houses. Mm-hmm. Where we have these embers, you have a lot of fuel load in them. Embers are igniting these garbage cans. Typically, if they're kept outside, they're kept very close to the house, right up next to the house. And once they become an ignite, we saw countless examples where even on homes that were undamaged, you saw the damage they caused to those structures, non-destroyed. So you could see the charring on, say, a stucco wall of where that garbage can had ignited. So they are absolutely a very, very large risk. It's something that we have to be mindful from a practical perspective, from a mitigation perspective, right? They're easily movable advice in terms of or objects, right? That you can move them out of the 0 to 5 foot zone, and you can easily move them right back in. So I think it points to some critical actions when red flag days are present to really move those garbage cans inside your garage.
Yeah, that was one thing that just really stuck out that we saw just again and again and again and again. I can't even count how many, half melted or totally melted garbage cans that we saw as we walked through these neighborhoods. Another thing we saw, a lot of our mitigations that matter elements at work here in both good and bad ways. So these are some of our home components, such as eaves, the 6-inch non-combustible vertical clearance, windows, siding, decks, and of course at zone 0. So these are the different elements that require mitigation that's based off our research at the lab, as well as observations like these from the field. And these are the elements that inform our wildfire prepared home standard. So I want to talk about some of those. A big one was vents. And Steve, I was with you at a few of the different houses. We came across one house that had retrofitted their vents. They had placed 1/8-inch mesh on top of 1/4-inch mesh, but we saw many, many more homes that simply had 1/4-inch mesh. And this is important because you want the 1/8-inch mesh in order to keep the embers out of your home. Talk about that aspect and some of the things we saw with vents in the field.
Yeah, so the homeowner realized that they had a vulnerable vents on their house with the 1/4-inch mesh, and they were able to just get some non-combustible metal mesh material, cut it out to the size of that opening, and then affix it to the outside of that to reduce that vulnerability. At a 1/4-inch, embers can pass through into the space behind and have enough energy in them to ignite a combustible item inside the house. At 1/8 of an inch, that vulnerability is much reduced. So, so we saw actions like that around different homes throughout both fires, where homeowners had implemented some actions, what we term the mitigations that matter, or the actions that you can take to reduce the risk to your home. But there's still a lot of vulnerable components left. So we really need to get homeowners to take the full set of actions and really meaningfully reduce the risk to their house.
Yeah, I specifically remember seeing at least one house where the gable end vent, it was obvious that maybe embers had entered there and the entire house burned down. I took a photo with embers sitting right outside the vents on the ground. So we saw a lot of evidence to the importance of 1/4-inch or 1/8-inch mesh over 1/4-inch. So that is certainly one of the things we saw a lot in the field. We also came across some interesting examples illustrating the need for that 6-inch vertical clearance around the bottom of a home. So explain what this is first off, Murray.
Yeah, so anywhere really a vertical surface of your home meets a horizontal surface is something that's risks. It's where embers can accumulate. The embers hit the wall and they drop down and they hit right in that edge. And I think that's something that's critically important. So we saw a lot of examples where embers accumulated and lit doormats on fire, right? And so the doormats on fire, so now you have a much larger fire and it poses a larger risk to that structure. Or cases where they ignited mulch right at the base of the wall, or garage door, the framing around garage doors. So all of these are examples where embers were just along the ground. They came up against a vertical a wall of your structure, and they were able to ignite that if it was combustible. And so that's why those 6 inches close to the ground are so critically important.
Right. And I think that house, and in some parts around the house, they did have gravel against their wall, but then in other parts of the yard, they had mulch up against the house. So that's combustible versus non-combustible. You want it to be all non-combustible.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that particular case, they had a mix of rock mulch and wood bark mulch. And in some cases, they were fortunate that where they had the wood mulch and it did burn, they had stucco non-combustible siding. You could see the burn marks on the wall. Mm-hmm. Where they had the wood siding, they had rock mulch. So they didn't have that ability to ignite that wall in that same way.
Right. So that was certainly something that, that was an interesting house. So that is very important, the 6-inch vertical clearance around the bottom of a home. And we saw a lot of evidence in the field there of a lot of bad examples, few good examples too. Another thing we saw, many cracked and broken windows. In many instances, the fire had made it into the home, maybe through these broken windows. We saw homes with combustible siding, combustible wood decks as well. Talk about these elements.
Yeah, so you definitely want to make sure your windows stay intact, right? So because windows can allow the radiant heat to penetrate, and typically we have curtains or blinds on the other side that are combustible. So as soon as you lose that outer glazing, you're subjecting the interior house to the flames and radiant heat, but also embers. Embers can now fly through those windows and then ignite, say, your bedspread or what have you. So you really need to keep that perimeter intact, and so that they pose a real risk when they actually do break.
And there were two houses that come to mind. One, Steve, was the hot tub house. That the hot tub was placed very close to the back of the house where there was a window. The window had broken. That house did not burn fully. There was some damage though. And then there was another home that had some very tall hedges very close to the side of the house. And the second story window, I don't know if you remember that house that you and Ollie were at, the second story window had broken, likely because of the heat from those burning bushes. So you want to keep your windows from breaking, and by doing that, you need to, keep other things from catching on fire that are located near the windows.
Yeah, so it's really about the weakest links in the structure and how the fire can exploit those weakest links. And so you look at the exterior components of the structure, the materials that they're made out of, and then the things that surround the house that can ignite, like that row of hedges of bushes that you mentioned, and can, if they ignite, get to that weakest link, which oftentimes is that window. Can it break that window and allow the fire to get inside from there, either embers or direct flame travels inside the house. And so it's a combination of trying to, as we say, reduce the exposure or move those things that could potentially burn that are close by the house away. So we either remove them off the property, maybe we relocate them to a different area where they're not going to be a hazard if they ignite. And they don't provide that pathway for the fire to travel from one location to the next or one property to the next. Or we can reduce the flammability of them in the instance of a fence. We can make it non-combustible versus a wood fence. And so it's really that combination of looking at the things that surround the house, making them, breaking up those pathways for the fire to travel to the house, and then making the house more resilient with more fire-resistant building materials.
And then perhaps most common of all, the connective fuels, specifically connective fuels within that zone 0. We saw plants, vehicles, trees. The homes in this part of California are beautiful. A lot of them have a certain design aesthetic that includes vines growing on the home itself, on wooden trellises attached to the home, beautiful greenery, but it was right on the house or within the first 5 feet of the house. Garden hoses, hot tubs. We saw all of these things right next to the home, and right next to other connective fuels, like you mentioned, like fences, privacy hedges, even a lot of Christmas decorations. A lot of these homes were still decorated for the holidays when these fires started. So a lot of fuel was in the first 5 feet of these homes. Talk about your observations as far as connective fuels in both of these fires.
Yeah. So I think very similar to other fires, it's just what the connective fuels are in that particular case. If you have those connective fuels and there's an adjacent structure that's burned, you're going to see some of that connective fuel that it has burnt, and it's where you also see a lot of cases where it's been intervention, whether it's the homeowner or firefighters that have really extinguished that. But you see really a lot of evidence of these, and it's really how that fire spreads from home to home to home. It's one of those key pathways that the fire has to continue to propagate through a community. Steve?
You mentioned all of the different things that we saw in zone 0, that first 5 feet that surrounds the house. And as Murray alluded to earlier, that these things almost brought houses down in the examples that we saw when we were focusing really on those structures that were damaged. And I think it's safe to say that in instances where homes were destroyed, that these things actually did lead to the ignition and loss of the houses. So, that first 5 feet, when you have combustible items in there, it's just another, part of the pathway for the fire to get to the house. And it doesn't have to be a high intensity fire. Embers can land there, ignite even a very small fire in the mulch, and that burns to the combustible wood siding and ignites the house from there as an example. So that first 5 feet, non-combustible, so critical.
Yeah. I remember an example during the Eaton fire where they had non-combustible siding but they had mulch, and then it ignited, and they had a penetration for a hose bid on the outside of the house, and the fire was able to use that penetration of the wall to actually get inside the wall and ignite really the home from the inside. And so they actually had a fire in their garage, in the inside of the garage, because it was able to go from combustible material in that first 5 feet through that hole in the wall and into the actual wall cavity.
Wow. Certainly a very important element. And Steve, you're from California. You live in California. I know a lot of the reason folks live specifically in Southern California, these homes are beautiful. These neighborhoods are beautiful. The vegetation is gorgeous. I understand why they live here and why they want their homes to look a certain way. What do you think homeowners are going to come to a realization after this fire about that zone 0, and how hard do you think it will be, or will it be hard at all for us to get homeowners to kind of think about some of these things as they're building back?
Yeah, as we build back, we need to make sure that we build, with resiliency in mind. If we've had this event, we've had fires in the area of both of the Eaton and Palisades fires in the past. It's reasonable to think that fires will impact those communities again in the future. And so they need to really do all that they can do now when they're starting fresh to build with wildfire resilience in mind, so that they don't lead to another kick the can down the road and potentially have another disaster like this unfold. So, and Zone 0 really plays a critical component of that. There's a lot of perceptions out there that it's not aesthetically pleasing, and it could be costly, but just removing the vegetation and other combustible items is the cost. Really, you don't have to put anything back in there. You can beautify it if you want to, and really give a lot of curb appeal so that it is aesthetically pleasing, but yet with wildfire resilience in mind.
Yeah, and we did observe many elements that needed mitigation, but we also saw a number of homes that were about, I think you said about halfway there, Murray. And there were several yards that I can picture in my mind that were very aesthetically pleasing, gravel yards with cacti and other, minimal plants. And some of these homes were about halfway there. Some had even done some vegetation management. We went to that one house that had cleared off the back part of his property in that really steep terrain. He had gotten rid of all of the scrub and all of the trees that led to the backside of his property. So, some folks have 1 foot in, and there's not much farther to go.
Yeah. It's one of the things that it's good news, if there's any good news at all in this, is that a lot of the properties that we saw and a lot of the architecture are halfway there, as you said, right? There's just the other half of elements that really need to be done in order to really bend down that risk curve. But it's not as monumental as a task as you may feel that it is at the start. There's a lot of houses that really only have kind of a short list of things that they just need to do. They have a great base and a great starting point to do those final mitigations to protect their homes.
All right. Well, what is next for IBHS with this work? We've collected the data now. What happens next?
So now really we start the process of really combing through all of this data and looking at for common trends or common features as we look at the structures that did survive and the different components that were available. So we'll look at how did fires burn to particular houses, how were they vulnerable, and so what are those key characteristics or what are those key important features that we make sure that we continue to mitigate.
Steve, any kind of final thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, even high intensity significant fire behavior that these two fires had associated with them, with the high winds and drought conditions, there are still a lot of things that property owners can do, and other organizations that have a stake in the wildfire issue here, and how they can help property owners build more resilience in their property and on their home as well. So it takes looking at your individual property, figuring out what vulnerabilities you have, and then develop a plan on how to work on those over time, as it may take a little bit of time to build complete, as we like to say, that systems-based approach to wildfire mitigation. To build that complete resilience against wildfire could take some time. So develop your plan and then start implementing it.
Any final thoughts, Murray?
No, I think Steve summed it up just perfectly right there.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys both for joining us. And this was our post-damage investigation of our LA County wildfires. And we want to remind everyone that the 2025 LA County wildfires early insights paper is out right now at IBHS.org, and it's available to everyone. So be sure to share that far and wide. And in the months to come, Maria assume we'll have a full research report at some point on our deployment and the findings of our post-damage investigation. So thank you both for joining us today. And this has been Disaster Discussions, Observations in LA, how the Eaton and Palisades conflagrations became two of California's worst. We'll see you next month.
Thanks for listening to the Disaster Discussions podcast. Join us next month for a new episode. For more on IBHS's ongoing research efforts, visit IBHS.org.